Hey guys, welcome back. So today I'm going to be doing my full in-depth review of Dot and Bubble. Now this episode certainly did have some surprises in, so let's turn on the dot and see what the bubble contained. Normally I'd start off by talking about Ncuti and Millie, but considering they weren't in it a great deal compared to Lindy, there isn't too much to discuss, of course, except that final scene which I'll be delving into later. But yeah, I wouldn't say there was too much to say. Although the Doctor was in it more than he was in 73 Yards, I still don't feel like there's a lot to say, except of course the final scene. Lindy, played by Callie Cooke, did such a phenomenal job, and you really could really dislike her because she was so unlikable. She was mindless, she was racist, she was just so arrogant, so entitled. I just really didn't like her. I thought actually what they were going to do was start off her with her being horrible and then she sort of mellowed out through the episode. But actually, as the episode goes on, she gets even worse. So she's probably one of the most unlikable characters New Who has ever produced. But it does make quite a nice change for it to be, for example, a guest lead who is actually dislikable, because we had sort of Sally Sparrow in Blink, but she was really likable. And this one is such a difference, so I do like how they've done a different twist on it. I do wonder though, does this sort of make the episode a bit less enjoyable because it's not someone we can sort of connect to and enjoy as much? Although her performance itself was brilliant, does having a dislikable sort of guest star as a lead make the episode less enjoyable? I do wonder about that. I do enjoy the cold opening this episode produced because I feel like it's a great introduction to the bubble and to see how it works. And something that I really enjoyed, which no one's really talked about, is that sort of light up toothbrush. I really like the concept of how it's in the future and how you don't even have to touch your teeth for it to be cleaned. I just feel like that's such a cool addition to the episode. Something really small, but I really did like that. And it does sort of look like a sonic toothbrush, if you ask me, the way it sort of lights up as well. So they could make merchandise out of it. I mean, I'd buy it. Looking back early on, you do sort of get some subtle hints that she is actually racist towards the Doctor. For example, she almost instantly blocks the Doctor, but not Ruby. Then she sort of discusses about how she hates the Doctor and she looks forward to him being disciplined. Then she also says that she just thought he looked the same. Now that could be cast as racism as well, depending what she actually meant by that. So there are quite a few sort of hints towards it, which at first, unless you really know, you don't really register. So I do like how they do that, and then on a second watch you actually notice these things. I also really enjoyed the look of this colony world. I liked how the sort of tunnels were like hamster sort of tunnels. And I liked how the windows were very circular as well. Just small things that I thought just looked really well. And I thought they did well to make it look like an alien colony. And it didn't look like CGI, so I really enjoyed that as well. And also the colour schemes, the sort of pastels of this world, I really enjoyed as well. It's just such a shame about the people, because aside from the people, it looks like it could be a nice place to live. The episode itself as well does well to reflect the type of people on social media nowadays, but in the future. You had Lindy, who was sort of like this fashionista who was very climate conscious, trying to be relatable to the audience. And then you also had Ricky, who was sort of like using his looks and doing these dances to attract views and attraction. So I do like how they played on that, because that is what they sort of do nowadays. So I do feel like they hit that mark quite well. It's around this part of the episode that the slugs are introduced, and like a lot of people, I'm left with a few questions. Why did the dot actually create the slugs if the dot could kill people itself? Also, what happened to the slugs at the end of the episode? And why didn't the slugs, although they were going in alphabetical order, when someone stepped in front of them, why didn't they just go for them and then go back to the alphabetical order? So there's quite a few questions surrounding the slugs, which it just doesn't make sense. And I do like the look of the slugs, and I do like the slugs themselves, although sometimes the CGI was slightly poor. But apart from that, the slugs were cool, but I just feel like they were slightly unnecessary. Something this episode done really well, which isn't done a lot nowadays, including with Doctor episodes, is have such a subtle message about mobile phones. I just really felt you could sort of tell that this was trying to tell us not to be so reliant on mobile phones, but yet, unlike messages in other Doctor episodes, it wasn't in your face. It was so subtle, but you still get it. I mean, if you look at the episode, they become so reliant on the bubble itself that they don't even know how to walk. So I feel like it's a great message to us to not be so reliant on our phones. And because it was never really discussed, it just was handled so well. So I really liked how subtle that was. It's also here where Lindy sees that her friend's been eaten by the slugs, and instead of talking to Ruby, she plays Ricky September, which I do like how they do that, because it's so much easier to ignore it and try and forget than actually address the problem. And it's also here where she tries to walk on her own, which she can't, like I just mentioned earlier. And generally, for the first time only, I felt sorry for her because she was saying how stupid she was, and I did actually feel sorry for her. But of course, once you learn what she's like at the end of the episode, whenever you rewatch it, you're never going to feel sorry for her again. So that was the only part of the episode in the first watch only that I felt sorry for her. But looking back, there's absolutely no way. A nice callback to the first Russell T Davies era was the Finetime police being busy with the automated message on repeat. It really was reminiscent to me of Gridlock and them trying to get hold of the police, because it's a very similar situation. They're trying to contact the police and they can't, because in the real world outside of where they are, they're all dead. So I do like how that was sort of a callback to Gridlock. It wasn't just Finetime I liked the look of, as mentioned earlier as well. It was the Wild Woods and the Home Planet as well. Now, the Wild Woods I felt looked so mysterious and vast, and it just looked amazing. And then you've got the Home World as well. It generally did look like a futuristic city on an alien planet taken over and gone dark. So I really did like the look of these places. And it wasn't just that as well. I even like things down to Lindy's sort of colours matching the bubble itself. So all of these things were a highlight for me. I just really like the look and the colours of this episode. Now, if you're paying attention in the episode, you would have seen some real-life TV references in it. For example, Ruby saying Love Island, the planet, and then Ruby again saying Heartstopper. Now, that Heartstopper scene, I feel it's always a surprise, like it was with Wild Blue Yonder and Isaac Newton. It's quite a surprise for me personally when the Doctor describes someone as hot, because I always feel like they've been a lot more reserved in the past, the previous incarnations. So now the Doctor's more opening with sort of calling people that. It always does take me by surprise, but again, like with Wild Blue Yonder, again, a second time round when you're watching it, it just feels a lot more natural. But again, these sort of things do take me by surprise. And of course, with all of the sort of trailers and sort of shots we've seen of Rogue, it's quite clear that Bridgerton is also going to be heavily name dropped as well in the next episode. Once again, Susan Twist makes her appearance, and this time the Doctor recognises her as well from Boom. And interestingly enough, Ruby recognises her, but suspectedly from actually 73 Yards. And it's quite interesting that this has sort of been brought up again. It makes me wonder, it raises the question, will 73 Yards play a bigger role in the series? Is this not the last we've heard of the 73 Yard storyline? So that would be quite interesting to explore that more, and I really do hope they do, because Ruby does sort of remember it, which is quite interesting, like she did at the end of the actual episode of 73 Yards itself. My biggest problem with the episode first time round was there was too much of being inside the bubble, and on the second watch it wasn't as bad, but it's still there, and it sort of makes me wonder, this is sort of like the episode they could have got away with back when there were filming restrictions, but now it just doesn't feel right. It just feels a bit too boring being in the bubble so much, and it feels like they could have done it over Zoom. So whilst on the second watch it isn't as bad, it does get to a certain point where I was getting a bit sick of the bubble itself, and I just wish there was sort of more in-person things happening. So I would say that's probably the weakest part of the episode. Again, not as bad the second time round, but still an issue. I enjoyed it when the bubble died, not only because it meant we saw less of it, but because as well, the way it was sort of filmed and it was slowly running out and she couldn't understand the Doctor and it was fading. So I did like that, and also there was quite a turnaround afterwards of her walking. Except walking into the lamppost, she did quite well, and then as soon as she sees the slugs again, she can barely walk and walks into them. So there was quite a few turnarounds with walking in this episode, so that was a bit of a disappointment itself. Now, funnily enough, with the previews I saw, I actually didn't like Ricky September because I thought he was another one of these mindless ones. But actually, he was the one I most enjoyed out of Finetime, naturally, of course. Now, I did like him because he was very sort of like the Doctor, and there was even parts of the episodes where he sort of talked like the Doctor. So I thought that was really cool, and I really liked how he didn't use the bubble too much either, and he was actually reading, so he was actually educated. And there's this sort of debate going on whether he was one of the racists as well, but I genuinely believe that he wasn't, because he was obviously well educated and he didn't show any disgust towards the Doctor. So it looks like he was an exception to the so-called standards of Finetime, which I'm really glad about. But him himself, I wouldn't say he was a racist, and actually he was the most likeable, of course, of the episode, except the Doctor and Ruby. So I'm really glad he was one of the good ones, and he actually turned out to be very likeable, which is quite a surprise. Seeing as this society was so disconnected in more ways than one, it was quite funny to see how hugs were seen as something major and something which needed consent and was seen as your first time. I feel like this is the type of sort of society the Doctor would say would need a baby farm. Except Ricky, the only other person I felt sorry for was Susie Pentecost. Of course, she would have been another of the racists, so once you know that, you don't. But at the first time round, the first time watching it, I felt sorry for her because Lindy really didn't care. She was more concerned about herself than just seeing someone die. So again, this just shows how dislikable Lindy is. And actually, talking about this scene itself, I'm still not 100% on why he had to type in the numbers every 5 seconds. I feel like it was just put there so they could sort of discuss in the bubble again and find out why the people were dying in a certain order. So I'm not too sure about that scene either, because it just feels a bit placed there just to sort of pace the episode so that they could sort of describe a few things and explain a few things. So that whole scene with putting the numbers in I felt was a bit weak itself. After this is the scene where the Doc turns against Lindy and starts to attack them. And this is the first surprise of the episode, I would say, the first big one. Because it's where she turns against Ricky and sort of betrays him just to save her own life. He's just saved hers and that's how she repays him. It is quite a shock, and even down to the way it sort of killed him. The way it sort of flied straight through his head like a bullet. And then he just drops to the floor. That was quite a surprise. So I feel like this is where the episode really starts to turn and give you some real big surprises. So I do really like how that sort of completely took us out of nowhere. Then Lindy goes down to the dark, narrow tunnels with everyone else, and I feel like this is a great metaphor for their thinking and their beliefs. It's dark, it's narrow, and it's just like them, so I really did like that metaphor. And I generally believe that the Doctor and Ruby knew that she helped to kill Ricky September, because you could sort of tell on their faces, and they could obviously see through her obvious lies. The way in which they sort of describe Lindy's parents going up to the sky, I felt like was quite childlike, and again it sort of represents their thinking, a sort of like poison childlike thinking. So again, I like how this sort of represents their sort of mind and what they sort of believe and think. What I liked is how the racism wasn't blatant. I liked how it wasn't blatantly racist, because not all racism is very clear. Sometimes it could be very subtle, but it's still racism nonetheless. And I thought it did quite well, because at first I thought they didn't want to travel with the Doctor and Ruby because they were a different species from themselves. But when they start to pick on the Doctor, it's then when you start to realise why exactly it is. So I do really like how it was never actually specifically said, but you could tell that was the reason. Now, the Doctor's reaction to it, of course, was absolutely amazing, raw and unfiltered. He's laughing at how stupid it is, but then screaming at it at the same time. And even Ruby's reaction itself, getting really upset and emotional over it, was really great as well. And even Lindy, the character herself, Callie, Cooke, who played her, she did such a great performance as well, because you could really tell on her face the sort of disgust she was portraying. So again, all of them did so well to portray this scene and sort of perform it. So I thought they all did really well. And something which someone said I saw on social media, which is so true and makes this scene even more sadder, is the fact that no matter what other Doctor it was, if it was a numbered Doctor, say like the 13th Doctor, the 10th Doctor, the 7th Doctor, the 2nd Doctor, whoever, this episode would have ended very, very differently. So I feel like it's quite sad, because it was the 15th Doctor, this was the ending that happened. But again, it just makes this episode so much more enjoyable. I also feel this scene reflects well on the Doctor and Ncuti. Now, starting with the Doctor themselves, it genuinely shows that the Doctor cares about all life, no matter how much they betray him. So I do really feel like that reflects well on the Doctor. And don't forget, this was Ncuti's first scene filming the Doctor, so he was literally thrown into it. But he did absolutely amazingly, so that's great to see. And yeah, this scene was really great as well, and I liked how they were sort of heading into the tunnel. I do wish in a way that they sort of showed a shot, just one shot of them going into the forest and dying to prove the Doctor right. But then again, I do like the sort of mystery around them going out of the tunnel and into the wild woods, because this is like the last time we will ever see them, and I feel like we are the last ever people to see them alive. So I do really like that, and it's quite a dark ending to the episode, but again, it's really enjoyable. Also, if you look at Lindy's face, I feel like deep down she knew that the Doctor was right and she should have gone with the Doctor, but because she's so filled with hate and racism and everything, she doesn't actually listen. So I feel like in certain scenes when she's on the boat, you can see the worry and her sort of doubting herself of what she's done, but at the same time, she's so filled with that hate and racism that she decides to stay on the boat. So that is quite interesting as well, but I do like how that was played as well. So again, this just amplifies that scene so much more. Overall, it was a good episode. Now, I didn't enjoy it as much as I expected to. I think other people had quite a low expectation, were pleasantly surprised. I had a bit more higher expectations, but I was slightly let down, and that's because I just felt like there was a bit too much in the bubble itself. But aside from that, it was an enjoyable episode, and I feel like it's sort of the opposite of the Doctor Dances, because in the end, everybody dies. So I do like the sort of dark ending towards this, and it does make it enjoyable. Now, originally I would have ranked it a 7 out of 10, and looking back, there are a few problems with it. Although it's really enjoyable, there are a few problems, so I'm going to stick it at 7 out of 10 because I feel like that sort of accurately represents the sort of my feelings on it. So I'm going to keep it at 7 out of 10. Looking at the poll I put out itself as well, it looks like the majority liked it, which has made quite a change because a lot of people have put that they've loved an episode. I feel like this is the first time the majority actually liked it instead of loved it. So it's interesting to see that. Again, there's not too much who disliked it or hated it, but there's still a fair amount, so that's interesting to see as well. But what I'd love to know is what you guys think. Did you enjoy the episode? Did you like it as much as you thought you would, or were you sort of let down? Let me know in the comments below. But again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and hopefully see you in my next video soon. Thank you all for watching, and take care.